Nylah O'Neal walked into North Hollow Prep, thinking it was just another school. She didn't know her silence would echo louder than screams. She didn't know her hair would become a weapon, and her truth, a revolution. But what they didn't know was that her father is Big Shaq. And he wasn't just watching, he was waiting to burn the system down from the inside. This wasn't just about bullying, it was about power, protection, and the price of staying silent. Bullies cut new black girl's hair in class, unaware her father Big Shaq is watching. Are you ready to hear what really happened when the cameras weren't rolling? Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. Some first days begin with hope. Hers began with eyes that cut deeper than words. The gates of North Hollow Prep stood tall, silver-lined and quietly intimidating. Like the kind of institution that didn't just teach lessons, it enforced legacy. The manicured hedges, stone statues of historical white figures, and brass plaques boasting Ivy League acceptances all whispered the same truth: you're lucky to be here. For most students, it was an unspoken badge of privilege. For Nylah O'Neal, it felt more like a test. She stepped out of her father's black Range Rover, wearing charcoal high tops, a vintage Prince tee, and her natural curls pulled into a high puff that refused to shrink for anyone's comfort. Behind her tinted sunglasses, her eyes scanned the campus slowly. She could feel the weight of invisible stares before she even made it past the front office. North Hollow was the kind of school where diversity was framed in glass beside the main office, literally. Photos of smiling black students from fundraisers and brochures decorated the entry wall, carefully curated, always cheerful. But inside the actual hallways, it was a different story. Nylah had counted less than 5 black students in the main building during orientation last week. 2 of them were siblings. The third didn't return her smile. As she made her way down the marbled corridor toward homeroom, the stares began. Not loud, not direct, but surgical. A tilt of the head, a whisper into a sleeve, a phone quickly lowered after a snap. She didn't break stride, but the muscles behind her knees tensed. It wasn't new, but it never got easier. The first class of the day was English literature. The teacher, Mr. Ellington, smiled too wide when he saw her. "Ah, our new transfer. Welcome, Nylah, right?" he announced, as if giving the room permission to look her way. She nodded once and moved to an empty seat in the 3rd row. No one offered a hello. No one moved their backpack off the neighboring chair. Next to her sat Delaney Reese, blonde, polished, wearing a Cornell hoodie like it was an heirloom. She barely blinked when Nylah sat. Her eyes remained on her phone, thumbs moving methodically. A quick glance showed a group text titled NH Royalty, light up with, "Yep, that's Big Shaq's daughter. Let's see if she can handle real class." The morning passed like cold wind through a crack in the window, constant, distracting. In chemistry, Brooke Lanson audibly sighed when paired with Nylah for a lab. "I hope you can keep up," she murmured, never making eye contact. In history, the teacher mispronounced her name twice, even after she corrected him. She saw Hart Jennings, student council VP, football legacy, snicker into his hoodie. At lunch, Nylah found a small table outside beneath a dogwood tree, away from the loud cafeteria. She didn't eat, just flipped through the leather-bound planner her father gave her before she left. Inside the front flap was a quote scribbled in his handwriting: "Be too big to fit their boxes." She pressed her finger against it for a moment, then looked up. 2 girls walked by, both white, both juniors by the looks of them. One leaned in and said too loudly, "Didn't know we let charity cases in now." The other laughed, covering her mouth. They didn't stop, they didn't look back. Nylah opened the Notes app on her phone and typed, "First day. Silent knives. All smiles for the camera. Everyone here speaks code. Still breathing. Not quiet." By her last period, her stomach was in knots. Not because of fear, but because she knew the rhythm now. She could predict it like choreography. She'd seen it in other schools, other spaces, always under the same disguise. "It's just a joke. Don't take it so seriously. We didn't mean it like that." But here, it wore a North Hollow badge. It came with perfect SAT scores and legacy scholarships. Here, racism was silk-wrapped. As the dismissal bell rang, she didn't wait to make friends or chit-chat at her locker. She walked fast toward the side exit near the gym, choosing the longer path to the parking lot. Her father's car hadn't arrived yet. She stood beneath the archway by the Sports Wall of Fame. Her eyes drifted across faces: lacrosse captains, swim team stars, debate champions. Not one of them looked like her. A tap on her shoulder. She turned. It was Mr. Cross, the janitor. Quiet, middle-aged, salt and pepper stubble and gloves that looked too big on his hands. He didn't smile, just nodded toward the nearby bench. "You all right?" he asked, voice low. Nylah hesitated. then nodded. Yeah. You sure? He repeated, gentler. She nodded again. He didn't push. Just said, if you need quiet, this bench here's good. Most of the noise don't come around this side. She sat. He walked away. No small talk. No comfort cliches. Just space. 10 minutes later, the Range Rover pulled up. The door opened before she reached it. Her father stepped out. Shaquille O'Neal, retired NBA legend, entrepreneur, philanthropist, looked larger than life even without the cameras. But when he saw her face, he knew. She didn't have to say it. Her eyes carried the same expression his mother once wore, when a college professor told her she was too articulate to be from Newark. He hugged her without a word. Not a celebrity hug. A father's hug. The kind that made space around pain. You want to talk about it? He finally asked. She shook her head. All right, he said, opening the door for her. We'll talk when you're ready. Inside the car, Nylah leaned her head against the window. The world outside blurred into suburban mansions and polished sidewalks. Her curls trembled lightly with the hum of the engine. She closed her eyes. In another part of the school, a hallway camera rewound itself to timestamp 11:48 a.m. Replaying the moment Delaney reached behind her in art class. Scissors visible for less than a second before the camera lost line of sight. The system flagged the feed as routine. No one was reviewing it. Except one man. In a separate room. Watching the screen. A man whose face was known by millions, but whose presence today was hidden by a worn hoodie and volunteer badge. His jaw clenched. Shaquille O'Neal didn't believe in public explosions. He believed in leverage. In timing. In making the quiet shake. And in this school, where silence ruled, something was about to crack. Cruelty doesn't start with fists. It starts with whispers too low for teachers to hear. North Hollow Prep shimmered under a facade of refinement. Marble floors echoed footsteps like a concert hall, and hall monitors in navy cardigans gave rehearsed smiles as students passed in tidy lines. But beneath the perfect architecture was something more precise than cruelty. It was culture. The kind shaped in private group chats and after-school gatherings behind closed doors. A culture that didn't call you names. It carved them into you with silence and glances. For Nylah, the whispers began before second period. She was walking past the trophy case on her way to biology when she overheard it. She wears that hair like she's trying to prove something. Two girls were pretending to admire a track medal. One of them was Delaney Reese. Her voice had that practiced pitch, just loud enough to be heard, just quiet enough to deny later. Nylah kept walking. She didn't flinch, but her steps changed, slightly sharper on the tile. The next day, it came from Brooke. In chemistry, she leaned across the table during a shared assignment and whispered, "You don't have to act so intense. We're just talking about molecules." The word intense hung like a smirk. The way she said it didn't mean passionate. It meant too loud, too opinionated, too black. Nylah offered a short, tight smile and got back to work. At lunch, the school buzzed with a different energy. The three main cafeterias were divided by subtle status. Athletes in the South Wing. Debate and Model UN in the East. The North Wing, where Nylah chose to sit, was the in-between. Loners, scholarship kids, and the few who hadn't found a clique yet. She pulled out a sandwich, but her appetite had evaporated. A whisper floated behind her. "Do you think she knows we can all smell that coconut oil?" Soft laughter followed. It wasn't confrontational. It was clinical. These weren't the bullies from childhood movies. They were more dangerous. Trained by generations of coded behavior and social structure. Their racism came dressed in smiles and sarcasm. Nylah began to notice the patterns. When she entered a classroom, seats would slowly fill around her, but not beside her. When she raised her hand, the teacher called on her less than anyone else. When she answered right, someone would follow with a joke. Guess Google works for everybody. She started writing in her journal during study hall. Not poetry, documentation. Facts, dates, names, reactions. It wasn't about vengeance. It was about not letting herself be gaslit, about knowing what was real in a place designed to make her question it. On Thursday morning, during a group discussion in literature about American identity, Nylah raised a point about Baldwin and the duality of being black in America. Hart Jennings, perched confidently across the circle, muttered under his breath, "Well, that's a dramatic take." His tone made it sound like she was rewriting the Constitution rather than quoting an author. The teacher glanced up, hesitated, then moved on. Later that day in the library, she saw Hart again, this time surrounded by his usual circle. They spoke softly, but their eyes flicked toward her table. She couldn't hear everything, but she caught two words: affirmative action. Her fingers gripped her pen so hard the plastic cracked. She wrote in her journal that night, They want me quiet. I won't be. Her father noticed the shift. At dinner she spoke less. Her posture was the same, but her laughter was missing. Shaq didn't press. He knew the signs. He'd seen them in locker rooms and board meetings, in school boards and endorsement deals. He recognized the same playbook, just younger hands holding it now. He began quietly making calls. Not official ones. Not yet. Just watching. Learning. Back at school, the trio escalated their subtle games. One morning, Nylah opened her locker to find a fake Hall of Fame photo taped inside, her face photoshopped next to a mop with the caption, "Shaq's real legacy." No one claimed it, but the glue was still wet. The administration shrugged. Kids can be mean. Try not to take it personally. She didn't cry. Not once. Instead, she wrote, "They weaponize smiles. They gaslight in real time. They want silence. But I was raised by thunder." The janitor, Mr. Cross, started appearing more often near her classes. Once, after a quiet run-in by her locker, he handed her a folded note. It wasn't signed. "People like you shake institutions, just by standing tall. That's why they tremble." She looked up, but he was already down the hall. By the end of her second week, the tension had thickened into something harder, something dangerous. Not physical, but corrosive. A kind of social acid dripping invisibly over time. Nylah had memorized their tactics, how Brooke used phrases like "our kind of people" in group projects, how Delaney narrowed her eyes every time Nylah answered a question, how Hart never said anything directly racist, but always defended the others like a practiced lawyer. There was no single moment to report, no quote that would hold up under an inquiry. It was all a performance. Denial would be easy. That was the genius of it. But the more they whispered, the more Nylah wrote. She detailed every side glance, every half-smile with loaded meaning. Her journal began to look like a field manual. She even started sketching maps, hallway corners where they whispered most, classrooms where teachers ignored the obvious, bathrooms where she overheard them laughing, daring each other to ask if her hair was real. They didn't know she was documenting it all. They didn't know how much her silence cost. And they certainly didn't know that someone else, someone tall, quiet, and calculated, was watching too. A man who wasn't just her father but her fiercest protector. A man who'd learned long ago that revenge wasn't always loud. Sometimes it walked in calmly, waited in corners, gathered truth. And when it moved with purpose. It takes 2 seconds to cut hair. It takes years to grow back dignity. The third Friday of the semester began like the others, polished and rehearsed. North Hollow Prep glimmered beneath the late morning sun, its clean hallways and polished windows presenting a front of perfection that masked the rot within. Nylah walked into the art studio just before the second bell, her sketchpad in one hand, earbuds tucked in but muted. She didn't need music, she just needed insulation. The studio smelled faintly of paint thinner and old canvas, and the back windows let in a soft gold light that usually brought her a sliver of peace. Not today. She took a seat at her assigned table in the second row, away from the windows and closest to the supply rack. Around her chatter buzzed. Delaney's signature laugh rang too loud. Brooke shuffled her designer tote onto the counter with the same entitled flourish she always used, and Hart leaned in a little too close to the easels behind her, pretending not to notice the paint on his cuff. These small theatrics played out daily, each role sharpened and performed without hesitation. The art teacher, Miss Fenley, started the day with an uninspired monologue about abstract expressionism. Her back turned as she organized brushes and handed out paint palettes. She seemed tired, or maybe indifferent. Either way, her eyes rarely left her task. Nylah quietly dipped her brush into burnt sienna and began building layers on her canvas. An image of a girl standing in a storm, unmoved, arms stretched out like she belonged to the chaos. It wasn't just art, it was armor. Midway through the period, the noise behind her shifted. The whispering had grown more pointed. She felt it, that familiar electricity in the air. Then silence. For 3 seconds, stillness. And then, a snip. Clean, quick, deliberate. Nylah froze, not out of fear, but because something inside her unraveled with terrifying precision. A single lock of her curls, freshly oiled and shaped that morning, slid down her shoulder and landed on her lap like a dropped ribbon. The room didn't erupt. No one screamed. Instead, Delaney laughed, softly, sharply. A cruel hum like she'd completed some twisted dare. Brooke leaned in with a mock gasp and covered her mouth, eyes dancing. Hart looked down at his phone, pretending to text, his thumb moving nervously. Miss Fenley continued speaking, still turned away. If she heard anything, she made no indication. Nylah didn't move. She didn't touch the cut curl. She didn't turn around. Her brush paused mid-stroke, trembling slightly above the canvas. Her heartbeat wasn't fast. It was slow, controlled like something ancient had been disturbed. Her skin crawled, not from fear, but from the sheer audacity of it all. She had known they didn't respect her, but now they had touched her body. Without permission. With intent. Not to hurt. No, that would have been obvious, but to humiliate. To own the moment. She blinked once. Her canvas blurred. Her breath stayed even. Still, no one intervened. Across the room, Mr. Cross, the janitor, was quietly mopping near the door. He wasn't supposed to be there until after lunch, but he'd started coming early, lingering near places where whispers echoed the loudest. He saw the lock of hair. He saw Delaney's scissors tucked casually into her supply box. He didn't speak. He didn't call attention. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a small phone, and dialed silently. A single ring pickup on the other end. "She cut it," he said. "You'll want to see the footage. Time's 10:41. Then he hung up. Nylah continued painting. After class, she stood, slipped the cut lock into her sketch pad, and walked out without looking at anyone. Her stride was measured, unshaken, but in her chest a fire licked the edges of her restraint. In the bathroom, she stood before the mirror, pulling off her hoodie. She stared at the uneven patch in her hair. Small, barely noticeable, but she noticed. She'd spent years learning to love those curls. Her mother used to twist them with coconut oil and whisper affirmations like gospel, "Your crown, your glory." Her grandmother called them rebellious prayers, and now one of those prayers had been cut away. She opened her backpack and pulled out the journal. Her hands shook for the first time. "They touched my crown. They don't know what they've done. Not yet, but they will." She didn't cry. She didn't tell a teacher. There was no point. Instead, she walked to the library and requested the study room in the back. There, in that dimly lit space behind the genealogy archives, she took a photo of the hair, taped it into her journal beside the entry, and wrote for 27 straight minutes. Words that burned, that spit, that bled truth. Meanwhile, the group chat between Delaney, Brooke, and Hart buzzed.
"Brooke, did you see her face? LMAOI.
Delaney, bet she tells Daddy. Watch us get sued over a curl. Hart, y'all are wild for that. I didn't even see it happen. Delaney, sure you didn't, Mr. Clean Hands. They didn't realize that the school's new hallway cameras had already flagged the timestamp. They didn't know that Shaquille O'Neal had installed a private server weeks ago through a third-party contractor under a tech renovation proposal. They didn't know that footage was already being downloaded, backed up, and reviewed, frame by frame. And they certainly didn't know that the school board chair, the head of operations, and one very quiet legal consultant had just received an encrypted video clip labeled Incident 10:41 a.m., Art Room 2. Later that day, Ms. Fenley would log the period as productive in her digital notes. No issues. She'd mark Delaney as engaged and cooperative, Brooke as social leader, Hart as respectful. Nylah's file would remain blank. Nylah went home that afternoon in silence. She rode in the passenger seat while her father talked on the phone, discussing a real estate development. He glanced at her twice, said nothing. But that night, as he passed her room, he paused at the door. "You all right?" he asked gently. She nodded, pulling her hoodie tighter. "Just tired." He didn't press, but he noticed something new on her desk, a journal, left open for the first time, and a lock of hair taped inside it. He said nothing. But the next morning, Mr. Cross received a folded envelope in his locker, with a post-it note. Watch room 2, period 3. Stay close. Use the second phone. At North Hollow, the facade of silence was cracking. Quietly, strategically, they thought it was over. It had just begun. What if the one watching is the one they least expect? The sun climbed higher over North Hollow Prep that morning, its golden light crawling through glass walls and shimmering across the floor like it belonged there. The illusion of serenity was complete. Laughter echoed down polished halls, teachers smiled behind steaming coffee mugs, and students floated between classes with the ease of those confident they'd never be held accountable. But beyond the facade, beyond the polished exterior and the curated culture, something was shifting. Something, or rather someone, was watching. In a quiet administrative wing of the school, past the office where parents were greeted with complimentary lattes and donor brochures, there was a room with no nameplate. Inside that room, Shaquille O'Neal sat with his hands folded, elbows resting on a wide oak desk. He wasn't dressed like himself. No luxury suit, no signature chain, just a gray North Hollow volunteer hoodie, khaki pants, and clean sneakers. He looked like any other parent helping out, invisible in plain sight. But his presence carried weight, like the pause before a storm breaks the sky. For 3 weeks, Shaq had watched, not through headlines or second-hand reports, Through screens, cameras, hallway feeds, server backups, all discreetly routed to a private system funded under the guise of technology modernization. No one had questioned the funding. When a man with Big Shaq's money offers school-wide upgrades, people sign fast and ask questions later. He hadn't come to the school just to monitor it. He had come because Nylah's energy had changed. His daughter had always been a mirror of her mother, stoic, fiery, thoughtful, but lately she had gone quiet in ways that worried him. Not the silence of being tired, the silence of calculation, the silence of pressure building beneath restraint. And Shaq knew that kind of silence all too well. The art room footage began to load. Timestamp 10:41 a.m. He leaned closer. The camera angle didn't catch everything. Just enough. Nylah sitting still, Delaney behind her. A flick of movement, laughter. Brooke leaning in, grinning. The teacher's back turned, almost comically convenient. Then came the moment Nylah reached down and gently picked up the lock of her hair. Her hand trembled, but her face didn't flinch. Shaq paused the footage there. He didn't say anything, but the temperature in the room seemed to dip. He ran it again. Then he opened the hallway feed. Miss Fenley walking past the camera after the bell, sipping her coffee, clearly oblivious or intentionally indifferent. Hart appeared next, texting as he passed by the lockers, his expression unreadable. Then came Mr. Cross, the janitor, walking slowly, pausing near the art room, looking down at the phone in his hand. Shaq smiled faintly. He knew loyalty when he saw it. Quiet warriors didn't wear medals. He tapped a button and transferred the footage to a secure drive. Then he picked up his phone and made a call. Not to the principal, not to the board, but to his own private counsel. Time to catalog, he said. No press. Not yet. Just lock it in. Then he hung up. Later that day, he appeared in the cafeteria, blending into the volunteer ranks, refilling trays of fruit and bottled water. His hoodie was zipped to the top. A name tag read only Coach Shaq. Students walked past without a second glance. The same students who posted TikToks about his mansion. The same students who laughed when his daughter walked past their lunch tables. Delaney strutted in with her usual click-heeled confidence, flanked by Brooke and Hart. They sat at the far-right table, the one with the best view of the courtyard, and incidentally, the least diverse seating arrangement in the school. Shaq watched them, stone-faced, as they ate, scrolled, laughed. He didn't need to hear their words. He already knew their language. He turned his head slightly and saw Nylah enter, alone, her hoodie pulled up, eyes locked on the floor like it was safer than making eye contact with the world around her. She didn't see him. She walked to her usual table in the far left corner, beside the emergency exit. Shaq watched her sit, open her journal, and begin writing. He saw the slow drag of her pen, the way her fingers gripped the cover afterward, as if to keep something inside from slipping out. It broke his heart, but it didn't shake his composure. When the lunch period ended and students dispersed, Shaq waited until the hallway cleared. Then he walked past the row of lockers, his shoes heavy on the marble tile. He passed Miss Fenley, who offered a polite smile without recognition. He passed a security guard who barely looked up. That was the beauty of wealth used carefully. It made you invisible when needed. In the staff conference room, he requested access to the guest Wi-Fi under the pretense of uploading yearbook photos from a volunteer event. He connected the secure drive and uploaded the incident footage into a private cloud, locking it behind a firewall. Then he printed two stills, one of Delaney's scissors mid-air, the other of Nylah staring straight ahead, her hair freshly cut. He placed them in a sealed envelope and labeled it, "Attention, Principal Lyons, Confidential," then left it on the assistant's desk, unsigned. That night, he didn't mention the footage to Nylah. He made her favorite dinner, grilled salmon, roasted asparagus, and sweet potatoes. They watched a comedy special together on the couch, but he noticed she didn't laugh. Her head leaned against his shoulder, but her hands stayed curled into fists. After she went to bed, he stood in the hallway outside her door. In one hand, he held the envelope copy. In the other, her childhood photo, Nylah at age 4, smiling under a waterfall of curls while clutching a tiny basketball. He didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, Principal Lyons opened the envelope, read its contents, and felt his stomach sink. He recognized the implications immediately. The scissors, the failure of supervision, the visual proof. But more than that, he recognized the man who sent it. He knew only one person in their network had the power, money, and motivation to pull this kind of surveillance. Nylah O'Neal hadn't just sent footage. He'd sent a warning. Lyons made 3 immediate calls: the district lawyer, the superintendent, and the head of donor relations. None of them picked up on the first ring. Meanwhile, in the East Wing's art hallway, Mr. Cross stood at the window, watching the campus move like a machine trying not to break down. He checked his phone once. A message blinked on the screen. Confirm status. Shaq's watching. He smiled and typed back, "They have no idea." The day continued. Lessons resumed. But under the calm surface, North Hollow had begun to fracture. Because the giant wasn't shouting. He wasn't threatening. He was just watching. And nothing is more dangerous to a system built on silence than a man with eyes behind the glass. When a giant stays quiet, the walls begin to tremble. Monday arrived with the same polished rhythm North Hollow Prep prided itself on. Morning announcements played over the intercom in the exact same tone. Teachers greeted students in hallways they'd walked 1,000 times. But something had shifted, subtly, like a gust of wind brushing a curtain before the window actually breaks. Shaquille O'Neal walked through the school's front doors at 9 a.m. sharp, not as a father this time, but as a philanthropist. His name had been listed on the invitation. Shaquille O'Neal, guest partner, Community Outreach and Expansion Committee. The receptionist smiled too wide when he walked in, stumbling over her greeting. She had no idea this wasn't just a courtesy visit. Shaq wasn't here for optics. He was here to apply pressure. Principal Lyons was already waiting in the conference room, adjusting his collar with the kind of nervous energy only guilt and hierarchy could stir up. When Shaq stepped in, he didn't offer the usual handshake or familiar banter, just a nod. He took a seat, let the silence stretch, then reached into his folder and pulled out a binder titled Equity Gaps, North Hollow's Racial Disparities. The pages weren't glossy. They weren't designed for donors. They were raw data, incident reports, screenshots of messages, and stills from hallway cameras. Proof. Lyons swallowed hard. "I want to help," Shaq said finally, voice low and even. "Not with words, with structure, systems, accountability." He turned a page. "And we're starting with the culture you've ignored." Lyons cleared his throat, trying to steady himself. "We're already implementing new sensitivity." "Stop," Shaq said, not raising his voice, but flattening the conversation like a palm over fire. "We both know performative workshops won't change what's built into the bones of this place. What happened to my daughter? That wasn't random. It was a result." Lynn shifted in his seat. "There's an internal investigation underway, but we need discretion. The board is very concerned about." "I'm not," Shaq met his eyes, "and neither are the families who've reached out to me since last week. Some of them haven't spoken before now because they thought it wouldn't matter." He closed the binder. "But now it does." Lyons opened his mouth, then closed it again. There wasn't a script for handling someone with Shaq's power, especially not when he wielded it with restraint. That made it heavier. Meanwhile, Nylah returned to school with her head wrapped in a deep burgundy scarf that framed her face like royalty. It wasn't a fashion statement. It was armor, a symbol, not of hiding, but of reclaiming. The hallway chatter dimmed when she passed. People stared. Whispers flickered. But her stride was clean and unapologetic. Her posture had changed. Shoulders squared, chin slightly lifted, not because she felt invincible, but because she'd decided fear would no longer write her narrative. Delaney passed her near the science wing, gave a crooked half-smile, and said just loud enough, "Didn't know we were allowed to wear pajamas now." Nylah didn't stop, didn't blink. She simply kept walking, because power wasn't always loud. And she knew something Delaney didn't. The storm was already moving. At lunch, Nylah sat at her usual corner table, unfolding her sandwich, flipping open her journal. Across the room, Mr. Cross gave her a small nod as he refilled the napkin dispensers. He didn't say anything, but his presence was intentional. Unbeknownst to the students, new motion-triggered hallway cameras had been installed in 2 more blind spots, funded and approved directly through the expansion budget. Shaq's signature was on every line. No press release, no announcement, just eyes where silence once ruled. In the main office, Lyons picked up a second sealed envelope that arrived without a sender listed. Inside were screenshots from a student group chat titled Hollow Crowns, a private group involving over 30 students, many of them athletes and student leaders. The messages weren't just jokes, they were ugly. Racial epithets coded in emojis, threads discussing how to push the new girl out, a poll titled Will She Last the Semester? The data was damning, and it had come from inside. A whistleblower. Someone had forwarded the screenshots to a private encrypted email address, one only a handful of trusted staff had access to, including Mr. Cross. That afternoon, as the school's diversity chair met with Lyons behind closed doors, Shaq sat quietly on a bench outside the gym, listening to the student body shuffle between classes. He didn't need to speak to them. Not yet. But he studied their faces. Not just the ones who had hurt his daughter. The ones who had stayed quiet. the ones who looked away. That silence mattered more than the cruelty. Inside the classroom, Nylah's art teacher avoided her eyes. Miss Fenley didn't bring up the incident. She didn't ask questions. She simply continued class as if the week before hadn't happened. But now, she was under a new kind of scrutiny. Camera footage, parent inquiries, a formal file under her name. When class ended, Nylah gathered her things slowly. She could feel eyes on her back, and for once she turned. Delaney met her gaze from across the room, trying to smile again, but it faltered. Because something was different now.
There was no apology, but there was a shift, a subtle step back, a change in posture. Because even when the system didn't punish, power changed the air in a room.
That evening, Shaq sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad. On it were notes, not about basketball or brand deals, but names, dates, contacts. His next step wasn't to go public, it was to go deeper. He was assembling a council, civil rights lawyers, education equity activists, private investigators, and former students who had faced similar situations at elite schools across the state. This wouldn't be about revenge. It would be about dismantling the pattern. Nylah came in mid-thought, holding her journal. She didn't say anything at first, just slid into the chair across from him and set the book down between them. Shaq looked up. She met his eyes. "I know what happened," he said softly. "I've seen it." She nodded once. "I didn't want to tell you," she said, "because I didn't want to be saved." He leaned forward. "I'm not here to save you. I'm here to make sure nobody else tries to silence you again." Nylah opened her journal. She showed him the entry from the day her hair was cut, then the ones after. He read every line. When he reached the bottom of the page, he looked at her, pride rising behind his calm expression. "You're stronger than they expected," he said. "I had to be," she replied. They didn't need more words. The plan was already moving, quietly, powerfully. Shaquille O'Neal wasn't shouting. He wasn't calling press conferences or tweeting statements. He was moving through channels the students didn't even know existed, calling board members during golf tournaments, inviting policy writers to casual dinners, using silence as leverage. And the more he stayed quiet, the more the system trembled. Because this time, the giant wasn't playing defense. He was playing the long game. The most dangerous thing about the truth is when it's recorded. The email that arrived in the inboxes of North Hollow Prep's administration, board members, PTA leaders, and select faculty was brief and well-mannered. It came from S. O'Neal and bore no hint of tension, just a courteous invitation. "Please join me for a private listening session on school culture and future growth. This is an opportunity to hear from one another and strengthen the institution we all value." There was no mention of Nylah, no reference to the incident, no undertone of accusation, just a date, a time, and a location. The founder's room, Friday evening, 6 p.m. The room itself was lined with walnut-paneled walls and portraits of benefactors whose bloodlines helped shape the school's legacy. Polished glass pitchers of cucumber water and plates of brie and grapes were placed neatly on tables. Candles flickered in sconces. The atmosphere was curated, respectable, and deceptively warm. As the guests filed in, conversations bloomed softly. Words like expansion, endowment, and image management floated in the air. Nobody knew quite what Shaquille O'Neal intended with this session, but curiosity trumped concern, and his name carried enough influence that even the most skeptical couldn't afford to stay away. Shaq entered last, wearing a tailored black sweater, no tie, and an expression unreadable to those expecting charm. He didn't offer his usual handshake routine. He simply walked to the center of the room and greeted them all with a measured nod. Behind him was a standing display monitor, hooked up to a laptop he set gently on a pedestal. "I appreciate everyone being here," he began, voice slow and calm, filling the room with ease. "I've been thinking a lot about the future of North Hollow, what kind of institution we want it to be, what we tell ourselves it is, and what it actually feels like to the students walking its halls every day." The audience shifted slightly. PTA President Dana Whitford, a lawyer with 3 children at the school, crossed her legs tightly and looked toward the principal, who sat near the back, already tense. Shaq continued. "When I volunteered on campus these past weeks, I wasn't there as a public figure. I came as a father. And as a father, I've learned you don't fix what you don't fully understand. You don't argue against stories, you listen to them." He gestured toward the laptop. A small click echoed, then silence. Followed by a voice, a girl's voice. Familiar. "Nylah. She's not even that smart. You think her dad's money got her here?" Then laughter. Soft overlapping. Then another voice. Female, older. "I mean, let's be honest. That hair? Not very professional. You think she'll make it past junior year here? More laughter. Then the unmistakable rustle of papers. A teacher's voice joined in. Miss Fenley, just pick a group and deal with it. We're not social workers. Gasps slipped from lips across the room. Hands moved to mouths. The laughter on the audio faded. Then another clip began. I bet she'll cry. These types always do. One tap and they fold. Another student male this time. The audio played for 4 more minutes. It wasn't just the words. It was the ease with which they were spoken. The casual cruelty. The normalcy of it. Conversations captured during group work, in art class, during lunch periods, and even a faculty lounge clip where 2 teachers mocked the overly sensitive energy of some quota kids. When Shaq clicked the audio off, no one spoke. He looked around slowly. No threats. No accusations. Just receipts, he said calmly. That's what listening gave me. Dana shifted uncomfortably. Where did you get this audio? I placed microphones in 3 rooms where I volunteered, he replied. All legal. Public access spaces. No minors directly recorded without surrounding context. Don't worry. I had my team handle compliance. Is this even admissible? Someone muttered from the back. I'm not prosecuting, Shaq replied. I'm documenting. So we can stop pretending we don't know what we know. A long silence followed. Principal Lyons cleared his throat. We had no knowledge of this behavior. Shaq turned to face him directly. But you suspected it. Lyons didn't answer. Shaq continued. You felt it in the way some kids sit quiet. In the sudden drop in enthusiasm from certain students. In the shift of energy when one type of kid walks into a room. You've all felt it. You've just never had to name it. Board member Gregory Holt, a stern-faced man who once donated an entire new athletic complex, finally spoke up. And what exactly is it you want, Mr. O'Neal? Shaq smiled faintly. Not warm, just precise. I want accountability. Public, not performative. Not another diversity week with colored flyers. I want teacher reviews based on classroom culture, not just test scores. I want student behavior logs to include microaggressions, not just detentions. I want a pipeline program for marginalized students. I want scholarship resources expanded. And I want it all implemented by spring, or I pull my funding and I go public with every recording. The air in the room snapped. And you'll hurt the school's reputation just like that? Dana asked, her tone now defensive. I'll expose the school's reality, Shaq said. Your reputation is your problem.
A hush fell again. Not fear, but calculation. Eyes darted across the room as the weight of his words settled.
He closed the laptop. If anyone feels this is an overreach, feel free to leave now. If you stay, we begin fixing it tonight. No one moved. No one left. And the parent conference that was never supposed to be anything more than a formality, a handshake session with a celebrity donor, turned into a reckoning. Quiet, professional, but deadly precise. Because in that moment, the myth of North Hollow's purity shattered. Not from a scandal, but from a recording. And the most dangerous thing about the truth is that once it's heard, it can't be unheard. Reputation is a mask, but some masks crack when the mirror finally speaks. North Hollow Prep had always prided itself on image. Its marble staircases and ivy-covered courtyards weren't just architecture, they were armor. Carefully scripted newsletters, glossy brochures, hand-picked testimonials from students of color who'd thrived, all stitched into a brand built on excellence and polished perfection. But masks, no matter how expensive, crack under pressure. And this time, the pressure wasn't rumor, it was proof. By Monday morning, the audio from Shaq's listening session had leaked. No one knew who had done it. Airdropped, maybe. Sent anonymously through a student or sympathetic teacher. But by 10 a.m., the clips were everywhere. TikTok edits with the caption, "She was never safe here," anonymous Reddit threads breaking down every voice in the recording, and private Facebook groups with alumni asking, "Was it like this when we were there?" The school's front office turned into a crisis command center. Phones rang non-stop. Media requests poured in. Reporters showed up at the gates, turned away by security, but not deterred. Principal Lyons held back-to-back emergency meetings, cycling through PR professionals and district lawyers, trying to craft a narrative that didn't exist. We condemn all forms of discrimination and are actively investigating the matter, the official statement read. But it was too late. The world wasn't waiting for investigations. It was reading. Because someone had started a blog. No photos, no name, just black text on a white screen. Title, "Pages They Tried to Tear Out." And it read like fire. When I walked through their halls, I stopped breathing halfway between my locker and my seat. Not because I was afraid, but because silence felt like the only way I'd be allowed to exist. They stared at my hair like it was a rebellion. They called my confidence aggressive. But what they really wanted was for me to shrink until I was safe for their comfort. They think being racist means screaming slurs. They don't realize it's in the laughs, the jokes, the way they protect each other from consequences. They think I'm overreacting. I think they've just never been told no. The post had been up less than 12 hours and already had 600,000 views. No name was attached, but people began to connect the dots. Comments poured in. Former students, parents, strangers, teachers from other schools, some anonymous, some bold, all echoing the same truth. This isn't just a North Hollow problem. Still, inside North Hollow, the powerful scrambled to shield their names. Delaney's mother, Candace Reese, a local councilwoman and rising star in state politics, called an emergency press briefing, claiming the audio was doctored and that her daughter was the victim of a racially charged witch hunt. Her legal team issued a cease and desist to multiple media outlets, threatening defamation lawsuits. It didn't matter. The screenshots and the timelines didn't lie, and neither did the growing number of students who came forward with their own stories. One junior girl wrote, "I wasn't the first black girl they tried to silence. I was just the first who didn't fight back. Nylah did." Brooke's father, a hedge fund executive and longtime donor, tried another route. He offered to cover new scholarships. Behind the scenes, he suggested quiet reparations through philanthropy to ease the noise, but that mask cracked too. A leaked email surfaced from his office referring to the situation as a branding emergency and labeling Nylah's blog as a disruptive narrative. The outrage only intensified. Every time the institution tried to put the fire out, the flames jumped higher. Meanwhile, Nylah watched it all from a distance. She hadn't planned for her journal to go public. She hadn't even told her father she'd submitted it. It was Hart, surprisingly, who'd helped her get it online. The same Hart who had once laughed when Delaney mocked her. The same Hart who now sat in the back row of every class, eyes lowered, as if carrying something too heavy for his posture to bear. He found her in the library one afternoon, slid a flash drive across the table and whispered, "I saved everything, just in case." She didn't forgive him, but she used it. And now her words were being read by people in classrooms, living rooms, and boardrooms across the country. Black girls sent her DMs, calling her brave. White girls messaged apologies, some sincere, some performative. But the current had shifted. She felt it. The weight on her chest hadn't disappeared, but it had moved, transformed into something sharper, lighter, like armor. Across the country, other students began publishing their own accounts. Hashtags bloomed. Read her pages. She didn't imagine it. North Hollow unmasked. Inside the school, changes rippled. Ms. Fenley was quietly placed on leave. Security teams rotated more frequently. A wellness space was opened on campus, complete with beanbags and motivational posters. But no real changes yet in policy. It felt hollow, cosmetic, like placing a band-aid on a deep fracture. Shaq didn't say much publicly, but he wasn't idle. He made calls to national education foundations, set up a scholarship fund in Nylah's name for students of color entering elite prep schools, connected with black journalists to help them track similar stories. He didn't want headlines, he wanted infrastructure. When asked to comment by a major network, he simply said, "They heard her voice. That's all that matters." But behind closed doors, he met with lawyers, reviewed whistleblower protections, funded digital security for students who were speaking up, and when a counter-narrative website popped up, attempting to correct the record by framing Nylah as a disruptive influence, he traced its IP back to a board member's home. That member was later asked to resign. At North Hollow, trust fractured like glass. Parents argued in the parking lot. Students whispered less, watched more. Some teachers spoke out in support of Nylah. Others quietly began editing their lesson plans, scared of saying the wrong thing. The facade had cracked, and now no one knew who was still performing. But Nylah walked the halls taller. She no longer sat in the corner of the cafeteria. She moved freely, wrapped or unwrapped, speaking less but saying more with every step. She didn't yell. She didn't demand. She let her story do the work, and that in the end was what scared them most. Because once a mirror speaks, once it reflects what's always been hidden, the mask has no choice but to fall. And when it does, it's not just a scandal. It's a reckoning. Not all who are silent are enemies. Some are just afraid. For days, Hart Jennings moved like a shadow through the halls of North Hollow Prep, silent, detached, no longer the golden boy center stage in group chats and class debates. His swagger had evaporated, not from shame that had already reached his doorstep, but from a deeper fracture, the unbearable tension of being exposed as both a bystander and a coward. Because sometimes, guilt doesn't scream, it quietly festers. He had watched the fallout unfold like wildfire. His name hadn't been mentioned publicly, not directly. The recordings hadn't captured him laughing or plotting. But he'd been there, at the table, near the lockers, behind the brush of every passing insult. And more than once he'd chosen the safety of silence over the courage to speak. For a while that silence had protected him, but it no longer did. The tipping point came on a Tuesday afternoon in early October, in the half-shadowed library where whispers were supposed to go to die. Hart stood between the biographies and the historical fiction shelf, gripping the edge of a dusty table. He had rehearsed what he was going to say 3 times, still unsure if words could fix the damage done. But he knew one thing for certain: if he stayed silent, again he'd become exactly what they said he was. Across the library, Nylah sat alone at the corner table, typing quietly, earbuds tucked in, her wrapped curls peeking out from under a soft black headscarf. She noticed him before he got halfway. Her eyes didn't lift immediately, but she knew his steps now. She had memorized them like a warning. He stopped a few feet away, clearing his throat, heart punching at his ribs. "Can I sit?" he asked. She removed one earbud, slow and cautious. Her stare said everything. "You had your chance." Still, she gave a small nod, not out of mercy but curiosity. Hart lowered himself into the chair across from her, fingers laced together in a nervous knot. He didn't speak right away, just looked at her, like he was trying to find the words in her face, instead of his head. "I didn't want to be part of it," he said finally. Her brow lifted, not in surprise, but in calculation. "But you were." "I know." His voice cracked slightly. "I let it happen." She didn't flinch, just waited. Silence, now, was hers to own. Hart exhaled. "The day in art class, I knew what they were planning." Delaney said it like a joke, but I could tell she meant it. I should have stopped it. I should have said something. Nylah didn't look away. "But you didn't." "No," he admitted, "because I was scared." That made her blink. Not in sympathy, in recognition. Fear, the oldest currency in schools like this. "I didn't want to lose my spot," he continued, voice softer now. "I didn't want them to turn on me. My dad's on the board. My whole family's legacy is wrapped up in this place. I thought staying quiet was neutral, but it wasn't. I know that now." Nylah leaned forward slightly, eyes narrowing. "So now that people are watching, now you want to talk?" Hart's jaw tensed. "No, I wanted to weeks ago, but I didn't have the—" He paused, ashamed. "I didn't have the guts." For a long beat, the only sound was the faint hum of the library's air vents and the scratch of Nylah's fingers tracing the edge of her journal. Then he reached into his backpack and slid something across the table, a USB drive. "What's this?" she asked. "Everything. Chats, screenshots, group messages, from before it happened. Stuff they said, stuff they planned." He looked her dead in the eyes. "This wasn't just about you. There were others, before you. Quiet ones. Girls who transferred out. Girls who never had a dad like yours." She stared at the drive. Her fingers didn't touch it right away. Because truth from someone who once chose comfort felt like a test. "Why now?" she asked. "Why not last year? Why not when it actually mattered?" "Because this is the first time someone fought," he said, his voice cracking. "And I realized I didn't want to be one of the ones you had to fight against." Across the campus, Shaq sat in the administration building, quietly reviewing facility blueprints for the upcoming renovation. But his eyes weren't on the architecture. They were on the student file open beside it. Hart Jennings, GPA, attendance, family donations, but also subtle reports, 2 behavior flags. Nothing serious, nothing documented as bias, but Shaq knew what to look for. Through a security monitor, linked to the library's external camera, he saw Hart sitting with Nylah. The conversation couldn't be heard, but Shaq watched Hart's hands tremble, watched his daughter keep her posture locked and strong, and watched the small objects slide across the table. "Let's see what you're made of," he murmured under his breath. Back in the library, Nylah finally reached forward and picked up the drive. Not as a truce, as evidence. She slipped it into her bag without another word. Hart stood. "I'm sorry. I know it doesn't fix anything." "It doesn't," she said plainly. "But I'm here. If you want help, if you need a witness, I'm here." She nodded once. Not in forgiveness, but acknowledgement. Later that day, the blog updated. "Sometimes the people who stood against you weren't enemies. They were cowards. But even cowards can choose redemption. Not through words, through action. You don't get to erase what you watched happen, but you can choose whether you keep watching or finally stand up." No name was listed, but readers noticed the tone shift. It was subtle, but it was growth. From fire to strategy. From witness to leadership. Hart didn't speak to Delaney or Brooke again. His silence with them now was intentional. He began eating alone. Teachers noticed, so did students. Some rolled their eyes, others followed. A few days later, he filed a formal statement with the school's equity office. Full names, dates, screenshots. He didn't ask for credit. He didn't post it. He just did it. Nylah didn't thank him. She didn't need to. This wasn't about gratitude. It was about choosing sides. And finally, Hart had. Silence can feel safe, but sometimes it can burn louder than fire. North Hollow's Great Hall had never been so quiet. Polished wooden chairs filled with students, faculty, and parents stretched in every direction, their bodies packed in tight rows while their minds churned. The room, designed to resemble an Ivy League auditorium with vaulted ceilings and stained glass windows depicting the school's 150-year legacy, had always been a stage for triumphs, award ceremonies, elite alumni panels, performances by string quartets. But today was different. There were no accolades to give, only silence to break. An official announcement called it a healing assembly, a chance to acknowledge recent events, to begin repairing community trust. The email had gone out 2 days prior with language so meticulously scrubbed it barely said anything at all. Not a word about racism, not a word about the blog, just the incident. The students knew better, so did the faculty, and everyone, from the board members seated near the front to the student athletes slouched in the back row, waited to see how deep this school was willing to cut into its own armor. Nylah had been asked to speak, officially, formally, twice, once by the principal, then again by the head of student affairs, who offered to co-author the statement so it sounded on brand. She had declined both times, politely but firmly. This wasn't her stage. Not this way. Not when the institution was still trying to manage optics rather than tell the truth. So she sat in the third row from the back, head high, wrapped hair pulled into a bun that gleamed under the high chandeliers. Around her, whispers buzzed. Not like before, these whispers were different. Some were cautious, some were reverent, some resentful, but none were dismissive anymore. At 9:07 a.m., Principal Lyons stepped to the podium. He cleared his throat, scanned the crowd, and began. Thank you all for being here today. These past few weeks have challenged us, tested our values, pushed our school community into a state of necessary reflection. The room was still. We are here to acknowledge harm, and to begin the process of repair. We are committed to growth, to truth, and most importantly, to listening. The applause that followed was soft, scattered, hesitant, like people clapping more out of obligation than conviction. Lyons stepped aside, nodding toward the chair reserved for a speaker who never came forward. Nylah remained in her seat, calm, and that's when it happened. Without warning, without introduction, a tall figure rose from the back corner and began walking toward the stage. Whispers followed his steps like a ripple through glass. Shaquille O'Neal moved with quiet gravity, each stride steady, deliberate, carrying more weight than his frame already did. No formal cue, no MC, just presence. As he stepped onto the stage, even the faculty seemed confused. Principal Lyons stiffened. A few board members leaned in, whispering frantically, but none dared stop him. He approached the mic, paused, looked out over the room, not as a celebrity, but as something older, deeper. Then he began to speak. I wasn't supposed to be up here, he said. Wasn't on the program, didn't ask for a spot. A few chuckles, nervous. I'm not here to talk about basketball, he said plainly. I'm not here to entertain you, or to scold you. I'm here because I've been watching, listening, and I think it's time somebody tells the whole truth. He looked toward the front row, then slowly scanned the rest of the room. This place is beautiful, but beauty can be a disguise. I've walked these halls quietly for weeks, watched my daughter come home quiet when she used to sing. I've seen the teachers who look the other way, the students who laugh behind phone screens, the adults who write checks and call that justice. He paused again. My mother's name is Lucille O'Neal. She raised me in Newark. She taught me about dignity before she taught me about defense. She told me, Shaquille, the world will tell you who you are before you even open your mouth. So make sure when you do, you speak truth. Silence gripped the room. When I see what happened here, not just to Nylah, but to others before her, to the students who left this place and never said why, I see a system that protects reputation over children. And that's not education. That's branding. The audience shifted uncomfortably. You can't heal what you won't name. This wasn't an incident. It was a pattern, a legacy in itself, one built in coded language, hallway glances, exclusion masked as tradition. He turned his gaze toward the senior faculty. Some of you have known. Some of you chose silence. Maybe not because you're bad people, but because you were afraid to rock the structure, to admit the cracks in the marble. A pause. But silence doesn't protect children. It protects power. A murmur ran through the crowd. And to the students, especially the ones who laughed, who watched, who whispered, who knew, it's not too late to become more than what you were. You are young, yes, but not too young to be accountable, not too young to change. He looked directly at Delaney, then at Brooke, then at Hart. They all lowered their eyes. Shaq's voice lowered.
I'm not asking for perfection. I'm asking for honesty. For a community that doesn't wait until the mirror cracks to admit it's been distorted.
He stepped back from the microphone. The silence was so heavy it felt like it had mass. Then slowly, a sound began. A single clap. From the back of the room. Then another. Then 5. Then the room rose. Not everyone, but enough. The applause built, not like a celebration, but like an exhale. Like truth being acknowledged after too long held back. Shaq didn't bow. He didn't smile. He simply nodded once, then stepped off the stage. As he passed Nylah, she looked up at him. Not surprised, not shaken, just proud. A pride that didn't need words. He squeezed her shoulder gently, then continued past, leaving the rest to the echoes. The principal didn't try to reclaim the stage. He couldn't. The healing assembly ended not with a speech but with silence reclaimed. The kind that burns louder than fire. Change always comes with a receipt, and somebody has to pay. In the weeks following the assembly, the golden halls of North Hollow Prep stopped gleaming the way they used to. The sunlight still poured in through the stained glass windows, but now it seemed to land on truth, not polish. The whispers didn't vanish, but they changed tone. They no longer floated with arrogance. They trembled with hesitation. Students, faculty, even board members walked the halls as though the school itself had been cracked open, and no one was sure how to seal it shut again. Because change had arrived, and it had a cost. The first signs came in paper form, legal documents served with official stamps and careful phrasing. 2 lawsuits filed by former students who had quietly left the school years ago, girls of color. No public complaints at the time, but their stories mirrored Nylah's. Verbal degradation, isolation, hair jokes, targeted discipline, and faculty complicity. Now, with receipts, witnesses, and Shaq's platform, they had the power to speak. Within days, 3 teachers were placed on administrative leave, pending investigation. Ms. Fenley was one. Another was a coach. The third, a middle school history teacher, had been considered a North Hollow veteran. His past statements, once shrugged off as old school, were now under fire. Inside the main office, the atmosphere shifted from control to containment. Principal Lyons, though not directly implicated, found himself under mounting pressure. His inbox overflowed, his phone never stopped buzzing, and while he tried to hold ground, the board fractured beneath him. Some members pushed for reform, true reform, not performative patches. Others, still clinging to legacy and image, argued for tighter media management and PR spin. Behind closed doors, they debated Shaq's growing influence. Some resented it. Others feared losing him. But all of them knew one thing. They had underestimated him. What they hadn't expected was who would follow him. Donations began to pour in, not from the usual inner circle of high society families or legacy alumni. These came from strangers, from people across the country. Parents, educators, artists, athletes, celebrities. They had read the blog, watched the assembly speech online, seen the transcripts, felt the weight of Nylah's words, and they responded. One by one, notable figures posted, "We believe black girls deserve to be seen and safe. I'm matching Big Shaq's donation. Let's fund futures." Tracy Ellis Ross. "Schools need more than policies. They need protection for our daughters. I'm in." Ava DuVernay. "This is why we show up. Not just for one girl. For all the ones who came before and stayed quiet. No more." Viola Davis. The momentum grew. Shaq didn't just support the noise. He built infrastructure behind it. He launched the CROWN initiative, an acronym for Creating Real Opportunity for Women Now, a scholarship and legal support fund specifically for black girls experiencing racial bias in private institutions. The program offered not just tuition assistance, but also legal counsel, therapy resources, and school advocacy liaisons trained to navigate elite educational environments. North Hollow Prep was the first school listed under its case study section. But change, real change, always provokes resistance. It started with emails. Threats, warnings, accusations masked as concerned citizens. Some came from fake names. Others didn't bother to hide. They called Shaq a race agitator, a celebrity hijacking education. One email included a photo of his house with the words "Go back to sports" in red. Shaq didn't flinch. He had seen worse in his youth, survived worse in the spotlight, but this wasn't about him anymore. It was about Nylah, and every girl who hadn't had a father with a platform. Security at his home was increased, his family protected, but his resolve didn't crack. He held weekly calls with civil rights lawyers, appeared unannounced at the school's diversity committee meetings. Not to take over, just to listen, then advise. Quiet power, relentless strategy. Behind the scenes, several families began to withdraw their children from the school. Some did it in protest, others did it in fear of the changing tide. And while the school's enrollment numbers dipped temporarily, the board knew what it meant: reputation bleeding into revenue. That forced a decision. Principal Lyons offered his resignation 2 months after the assembly. The official statement called it a mutual decision to explore new leadership opportunities. Unofficially, he had become the symbol of systemic failure, and in a post-Nylah era, symbols had consequences. In his place, the board appointed an interim head of school, a former dean from a New York-based equity-centered academy. Her name was Monica Graves, and she walked into North Hollow like a woman who had already seen too much to be intimidated by elite zip codes. Her first statement: "We're not here to preserve tradition. We're here to interrogate it." Not everyone was thrilled, but no one could stop it now. Inside the school, a new rhythm began. Teachers attended monthly equity training, not the kind with flashy slogans, but with accountability rubrics. Classrooms were evaluated not just on academic rigor, but emotional climate and student inclusivity. Nylah noticed the difference slowly. Her history teacher apologized, not just for the curriculum gaps, but for how he'd allowed discussions to remain unsafe. A new counselor met with students of color weekly to check in, off the record, judgment-free. Even seating arrangements in assemblies shifted. Nylah, once exiled to the back rows, was now invited to the front. She didn't always accept, but the invitation mattered. One morning, in late November, as she walked past the mural wall in the East Wing, she noticed something new. A frame. Inside it, a quote, printed on crisp white paper. "They think being racist means screaming slurs. They don't realize it's in the laughs, the jokes, the way they protect each other from consequences." Underneath anonymous student voice, North Hollow Prep 2025. She stood in front of it for a long time. Long enough for Hart to pass by. He didn't say anything, just nodded. The respectful kind. The kind that says, "You changed this place." Later that night, back at home, Nylah curled up on the couch beside her father. The fire crackled low. They sat in silence for a while, watching nothing in particular on TV. Then she said, "You think they'll stay changed?" Shaq didn't answer right away. He looked at her, at the girl who walked into a system designed to break her down and somehow bent it instead. He reached over, took her hand, squeezed it once. "No system stays changed by itself," he said. "It needs people like you to keep the mirror up." And in the flicker of that firelight, with lawsuits still active and threats still trickling in, they both knew. The cost of change was real, but it was worth every dollar. You can cut the curls, but you can't cut the roots. The folding chairs in the rec center weren't polished like the ones in North Hollow's auditorium, and the stage lights didn't glow with curated prestige. There were no catered refreshments, no branded banners, no PR professionals adjusting camera angles, but what filled the room that Friday evening carried a weight far heavier than decor. The youth-led town hall wasn't designed for optics, it was built for truth, and Nylah was its final speaker. She hadn't planned to participate at first. Others had been organizing it for weeks. Students from neighboring schools, community organizers, a few college activists who had followed her blog and seen themselves in her story. The lineup was diverse, raw, and unfiltered. Voices from private schools, charter academies, and public campuses who shared one thing in common. They had all been made invisible in places that loved their tuition but hated their presence. Nylah sat in the back, her journal in her lap, her scarf loose around her shoulders. Her curls, now growing in again, framed her face like a defiant halo. Every strand was a reminder of what had been taken and what she refused to lose. Speaker after speaker took the mic. A boy from a prep school in Atlanta described being told to speak less hood during a college interview mock session. A girl from Baltimore recounted how her school security guards routinely searched her backpack while ignoring others. Another student, non-binary, soft-spoken, described being rebranded by their school as a marketing success story, while administrators refused to use their pronouns. The room listened. The room wept. And then, with just 30 minutes left in the program, Nylah stood. No introduction, no dramatic entrance, just presence. She stepped onto the low stage, her steps unhurried, her journal open in her hands. A single mic stood in the center. She adjusted it only slightly and began to read. They said it was just hair, that it would grow back. But what they cut wasn't just a curl. It was pride. It was ritual. It was the version of me that still believed this school could hold me without bruising my roots. They didn't say slurs. They didn't scream. But they laughed when I hurt. They protected the ones who mocked me. And they told me to be grateful I was allowed in the room at all. So I made a new room. This one. She looked up. The crowd had gone completely still.
They called me dramatic.
They said I was blowing things out of proportion. But you don't get to tell someone how deep a cut is when you're the one holding the scissors. A soft murmur rose, then quiet again. And to the ones who stood with me, eventually, know this, allyship isn't a rescue mission. It's a reckoning. One that starts with listening, but doesn't end until the system changes. She closed the journal, then paused.
This wasn't in the notes. This was heart.
I used to think that strength meant staying quiet, not making waves, blending in, surviving without drawing too much attention. But silence is not survival. It's surrender, and I refuse to surrender. Her voice didn't shake, not once. The audience began to rise. Not wildly, not theatrically, just together. A standing wave of recognition, respect, reflection. Students held their phones to their chests, not recording, just listening. Some wiped tears, others nodded slowly, finally feeling what they'd been carrying spoken aloud. In that moment, Nylah wasn't a symbol. She was a mirror, one that refused to reflect anything but the truth. Later that evening, backstage, a girl approached her. No older than 14, braces and puffy braids, eyes wide with gratitude. They did the same thing to me, she said quietly. At my school, they said my twist outs were distracting. My mom told me to just tie it back, but when I read your blog, I didn't feel crazy anymore. Nylah reached out and took the girl's hand. You're not crazy, she whispered. You're not alone. Outside, the parking lot was lit only by a few tall lamps, their light slicing through the cool fall air. Shaq leaned against the hood of his car, arms folded, watching her walk toward him. He didn't say anything, just opened the passenger door. As they drove through the sleepy downtown streets, Nylah finally broke the silence. Do you think they'll forget? She asked. Shaq didn't turn. No, he said. They won't forget. But will they change? He glanced at her, then back at the road.
That's not up to them anymore. It's up to you.
She looked out the window. Buildings blurred, streetlights passed. But inside, something new had settled. Not vengeance. Not even victory. Roots, strong, deep, and unshakable. What they had taken from her had already begun to grow back. But what she had grown inside herself. That they could never touch. Some stories don't end. They ripple. 1 year later, North Hollow Prep no longer felt like a fortress. The iron gates still stood. The hedges still curled in tight symmetry around stone fountains and manicured paths. But something had shifted. The shine was still there on the brass plaques, the glass trophy cases, but it no longer blinded. Instead, it reflected something newer, earnest, imperfect, real. The changes hadn't come all at once. They never do. They came layered, slow, necessary, tested by resistance and reshaped by accountability. In the faculty lounge, 3 new teachers now sat where tenure had once protected indifference. One of them, a former civil rights educator named Ms. Holloway, taught a course called Power and Perspective, now part of the core humanities requirement. Another, a black male science teacher with lokes and a baritone voice, headed the STEM mentorship program, designed specifically for students from underrepresented communities. The classroom doors were no longer lined with generic motivational quotes. Instead, student-created artwork filled the halls. One mural near the main staircase depicted a girl sitting in a field of curls that rose around her like a forest. Her eyes were closed, her roots were showing. Monthly audits were now a permanent policy. Anonymous surveys, equity check-ins, third-party evaluations. Students weren't asked to smile for PR campaigns anymore. They were asked what safety felt like, what fairness felt like. The data lived in the open, not locked in filing cabinets, not buried in jargon. A few families had left. They'd called it a culture shift we didn't agree with, but they were replaced by others, new students, new parents, new perspectives that weren't asked to shrink to fit the walls. And on most mornings, a man in a navy blue North Hollow maintenance polo could be seen unlocking the gates at 7 a.m. sharp. Mr. Cross, no longer just the janitor, now held the title Student Safety Liaison. His job description had changed, but his presence hadn't. He still walked the halls like a quiet sentry, observing, listening, checking the invisible lines where harm used to slip through unnoticed. He attended faculty meetings now, had an office near student services, and when new hires were onboarded, he was the one who told them, "At this school, you're not just responsible for what you say, but what you let slide." His business card had a quote on the back, not his own, Nylah's. "You don't get to define the fire you never stood in." North Hollow wasn't perfect, but it was trying, visibly, daily. Nylah was no longer among its students. She had transferred by choice that spring, not in retreat, but in evolution. She'd been accepted into the Carver School for Performing Arts, a multidisciplinary magnet program 40 minutes away. There, her poetry found rhythm. Her voice became performance. She joined a youth theater ensemble, where she turned her journal entries into monologues. Her piece, titled "The Desk in the Corner," won a regional award. It was raw, unapologetic. It ended with the line, "They handed me silence, so I tore it into syllables and fed it back to them like gospel." The morning of her first day at Carver, Shaq drove her across town. No press, no entourage, just a father and his daughter, riding in comfortable silence. He parked beside the school's wide front steps and looked at the building like it was offering something he'd been trying to give her all along, space to become fully herself. "You nervous?" he asked, unlocking the doors. Nylah shook her head. "No." He raised a brow. She smiled. "Okay, maybe a little." He reached back and grabbed her backpack, handing it to her. "No cameras this time," he said. "Good," she replied. "I don't need the world watching anymore, just watching myself." They walked together across the sidewalk, up the steps. She paused before the entrance. He didn't speak. He just looked at her. Grown, steady, fierce. "You got this," he said. She nodded, then turned and walked through the doors, alone, but not unguarded. Because what had happened at North Hollow hadn't ended with a blog post. It hadn't ended with an assembly or a lawsuit. It had become part of the current, a ripple, one that carried her into spaces beyond the reach of their scissors, their whispers, their denial. Across the country, stories like hers had begun to surface. Other schools, private and public alike, started receiving letters, demands, testimonies. One district created a student-led advisory council in direct response to her blog. Another partnered with the CROWN initiative to restructure their grievance process for racial bias complaints. At least 3 elite prep schools reached out to Shaq's team for training materials. Some tried to frame it as the Nylah effect. But she didn't want her name on their change. She wanted her name on her work. At Carver, she focused on creation, not correction. Her curls grew freely now, sometimes tied back, sometimes wild. Not to make a statement, but because they were hers, no explanation needed. She still wrote in her journal, the same one, same leather cover, same ink. But now the entries sounded different. "I'm not building escape routes anymore. I'm building bridges, for whoever needs to walk across next." I used to think they took something from me, but all they did was show me how deep my roots were. This isn't my ending. This is just my next breath. Back at North Hollow, a new student, a black girl in 9th grade, stood outside the main building, staring nervously at the front doors. She wore a braided crown, held her backpack tight, and exhaled like she wasn't sure what would be waiting for her inside. Then a voice behind her. "You need help finding your class?" She turned. Mr. Cross stood there, kind-eyed. The girl smiled, only slightly. "Yeah, I'm new." He nodded. "Well, you're not alone." He turned and walked with her toward the building. And just like that, the echo continued. Beyond the walls. Beyond the noise. Beyond the cut. Because some stories don't end. They ripple. If this story made you feel something, don't just sit with it. Start the conversation in your school, your home, your boardroom. Support spaces where truth isn't silenced, and every student is protected, not just promoted. Change doesn't begin with a policy. It begins with who you choose to be when no one's watching. Because if you heard Nylah's story, it's already yours too. What will you do with it?